Marcus Rodriguez never believed in fate until the night a desperate woman stepped into his beat-up Honda Civic, clutching her swollen belly and tears streaming down her face. He had no idea that refusing her $23 would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just his life, but the lives of thousands of others. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create the biggest miracles, and sometimes the people we help when they have nothing are the very ones who lift us up when we need it most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the windshield of Marcus Rodriguez's 2018 Honda Civic as he sat parked outside the downtown Seattle medical complex, watching the digital clock on his dashboard tick past midnight. It had been another brutal 14-hour shift driving for 3 different rideshare companies, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. The passenger seat held a crumpled energy bar wrapper and an empty coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. His phone buzzed with another ride request, but Marcus hesitated, his finger hovering over the decline button. His wife Carmen was 7 months pregnant with their second child, and he had promised to be home before she went to bed. But the rent was due in 5 days, and they were still short $200. Marcus accepted the ride. The pickup location was just 3 blocks away, outside a small apartment building in the University District. As he pulled up to the curb, he saw her immediately. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, stood under the flickering streetlight, one hand pressed against the brick wall for support, the other cradling her enormously pregnant belly. Even through the rain-streaked window, Marcus could see she was in distress. Her long dark hair was plastered to her face, and her shoulders shook with what looked like sobs. Marcus quickly grabbed the umbrella from his back seat and stepped out into the downpour. The woman looked up as he approached, and he was struck by her face. Despite the tears and the obvious pain, there was something dignified about her, something that spoke of strength even in vulnerability. Her brown eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and determination that reminded him of Carmen during her most difficult moments. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Marcus called out, holding the umbrella over both of them. "Are you Rebecca Chin?" She nodded, unable to speak through her labored breathing. Marcus noticed she was wearing scrubs underneath a thin jacket that was completely soaked through, and her hands were shaking violently. Though whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "Let's get you in the car," Marcus said gently, helping guide her to the passenger door. As she lowered herself into the seat, a sharp gasp escaped her lips, and she gripped the door frame with white knuckles. "Where are we headed?" Marcus asked, sliding back into the driver's seat and immediately turning up the heat. "Seattle General," she managed between heavy breaths. "Labor and delivery. Please, I think something's wrong." Marcus felt his heart clench. Seattle General was across town, at least a 25-minute drive in this weather. He looked at Rebecca in his rearview mirror as she tried to find a comfortable position, one hand on her belly, the other pressed against her lower back. "How far apart are your contractions?" he asked, pulling away from the curb and into the empty street. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice tight with pain. "They started about an hour ago, but they're getting stronger. And there's been some bleeding." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Marcus saw fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. As they drove through the nearly deserted streets of Seattle, Rebecca began to open up between contractions. Her name was Dr. Rebecca Chun, and she was a resident in internal medicine at Seattle General. She had been working a double shift when the contractions started, but she had dismissed them as false labor until the bleeding began. Her husband David was deployed overseas with the Navy and wouldn't be back for another 6 weeks. Her parents lived in Vancouver, too far away to help, and her closest friend was out of town for a wedding. "I was supposed to work tonight," she said, gripping the seat as another contraction hit. "I was covering for Dr. Martinez because his son had appendicitis. Now I don't know what's going to happen. If I can't work, I can't pay for the apartment. The residency stipend barely covers anything as it is." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, seeing his own fears reflected in her words. He understood the constant weight of financial pressure, the way it could make even joyful moments like bringing a child into the world feel overwhelming and scary. About 15 minutes into the drive, as they were stopped at a red light, Rebecca suddenly cried out. Marcus turned to see her doubled over, her face pale and sweaty. "I think I need to call an ambulance," she gasped. "Something's really wrong. The pain is different now." Without hesitation, Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and put on his hazard lights. He turned in his seat to face her fully. "Rebecca, look at me," he said, his voice calm and steady. "My wife is 7 months pregnant too. I know this is scary, but we're going to get through this. Do you want me to call 911, or do you think we can make it to the hospital?" Rebecca looked up at him, and in that moment, Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The panic was still there, but underneath it was a flicker of trust, a recognition of genuine care in a stranger's voice. "Can you stay with me?" she asked quietly. "At the hospital, I mean. Just until they know everything's okay? I don't want to be alone." Marcus thought of Carmen, asleep at home, probably wondering where he was. He thought of their 4-year-old son Miguel, who had been asking all week when Daddy would have time to read him a bedtime story. He thought of the bills piling up on their kitchen table and the electric company's final notice tucked behind the coffee maker. Then he looked at this scared woman who was about to bring a child into the world with no one by her side. And the choice was easy. "Of course," he said. "Let's get you to that hospital." The last 10 minutes of the drive were tense and quiet except for Rebecca's breathing exercises and the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. Marcus found himself praying silently, something he hadn't done since his own father had been hospitalized. The year before, when they finally pulled up to the emergency entrance of Seattle General, Marcus quickly parked and rushed around to help Rebecca out of the car. A team of nurses was already waiting with a wheelchair, alerted by Rebecca's phone call during the last stretch of the drive. As they helped her into the chair, Rebecca reached out and grabbed Marcus's hand. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his fingers. "I don't know how to repay you for this kindness." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to repay anything. Just focus on you and your baby." As the medical team wheeled Rebecca through the automatic doors, she called back over her shoulder, "What's your name?" "Marcus Rodriguez," he replied. "I won't forget this, Marcus Rodriguez," she said, just before the doors closed behind her. Marcus stood there for a moment in the hospital parking lot, rain soaking through his jacket, watching the entrance where Rebecca had disappeared. His phone buzzed with another ride request, but for the first time in months, he declined it immediately. Something about this night felt different, significant in a way he couldn't quite name. He walked back to his car and drove home through the empty streets, the echo of Rebecca's words following him. When Marcus quietly opened the front door of his small rental house, he found Carmen asleep on the couch, her hand resting on her rounded belly, the television still playing softly. He covered her with a blanket and sat down in the armchair across from her, watching her peaceful face in the flickering light. Tomorrow would bring another day of driving, another day of chasing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Dollars and struggling to stay afloat. But tonight, he had been exactly where someone needed him to be, and that felt like something worth holding on to. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Miguel's laughter. From the kitchen, Carmen was standing at the stove, making pancakes, her pregnancy glow making her look radiant despite the early hour. "How was your night?" she asked, kissing his cheek as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Different," Marcus said, and he told her about Rebecca. Carmen listened with the kind of attention she always gave to stories that mattered, nodding and asking questions, her empathy shining through every expression. "You did the right thing," she said when he finished. "I hope she and her baby are okay." Marcus hoped so too, though he figured he would probably never know. In his experience, people move through each other's lives like ships passing in the night, leaving small wakes of impact before disappearing back into their own separate worlds. He had no way of knowing that Rebecca Chun was lying in a hospital bed just 15 miles away, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the kindness of a stranger who had refused to leave her alone in her darkest moment. Over the next several weeks, Marcus fell back into his routine of long driving shifts and short nights at home. The bills kept coming, and the financial pressure never eased. Carmen's pregnancy progressed normally, but they still couldn't afford the premium health insurance that would cover complications, and Marcus lay awake many nights wondering what they would do if something went wrong. It was a Thursday evening, in late October, when Marcus received an unusual ride request. The pickup location was Seattle General Hospital, and the passenger had requested him specifically by name. Marcus frowned at his phone, trying to remember if he had given his card to anyone recently. When he arrived at the hospital, he saw a woman in a navy blue business suit standing near the main entrance, holding a baby carrier. As she approached his car, Marcus's eyes widened in recognition. It was Rebecca, but she looked completely different. Gone were the scrubs and the desperate tears. Her hair was styled professionally. She wore minimal but elegant makeup, and she carried herself with an unmistakable air of authority. The frightened pregnant woman he had helped weeks ago had been replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. "Marcus Rodriguez," she said as she approached the passenger window. "Rebecca, is that really you?" Marcus got out of the car, still hardly believing the transformation. She smiled, and in that smile was the same warmth he remembered from that rainy night. "It's actually Dr. Rebecca Chin now." Well, it was then too, but I wasn't exactly in a position to make proper introductions. Marcus looked down at the baby carrier she was holding. "And this must be the little one who was in such a hurry to meet the world." "This is Emma," Rebecca said, adjusting the blanket around a tiny, sleeping face. "She's healthy and perfect, thanks to getting to the hospital when we did." "Thanks to you." They talked for a few minutes in the hospital parking lot, Rebecca explaining that Emma had been born just 2 hours after they arrived that night, and that there had indeed been complications that could have been dangerous if they had waited any longer. "I wanted to thank you properly," Rebecca said, "but I realized I never got your contact information. I had to call 3 different rideshare companies and convince them to help me track you down." Marcus was touched by the effort she had made, but he waved off her gratitude. "I'm just glad you and Emma are okay. That's all the thanks I need." But Rebecca shook her head. "No, Marcus, what you did that night was extraordinary. You didn't just drive me to the hospital. You stayed with me when I was terrified and alone. You showed me kindness when you had every reason to just drop me off and go home to your own family." She paused, looking at him seriously. "I want to do something for you, but I don't know what would be meaningful. What do you need? What would make a real difference in your life?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, overwhelmed by her offer but uncertain how to respond. Finally, he said, "Honestly, Rebecca, I don't need anything from you. Helping you that night reminded me why I do this job. It's not just about the money, though that matters too. It's about being there for people when they need it most." Rebecca studied his face, and Marcus could see the wheels turning in her mind. "You mentioned that. Your wife is pregnant too. When is she due?" 6 weeks, Marcus said, his face lighting up. "We're having a boy. Miguel is so excited to be a big brother." "And you're still driving 14-hour shifts?" Marcus nodded, suddenly feeling self-conscious about his circumstances. "We're trying to save up for the delivery and the time. Carmen will need to take off work. She's a teacher, so she doesn't get paid maternity leave." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you might surprise you. That night when you picked me up, when I was just another scared pregnant woman in scrubs, you saw someone who needed help and you helped them. No questions asked, no expectation of reward. You have no idea who I am, do you?" Marcus shook his head, confused by the question. Rebecca smiled. "I'm the new director of operations at Seattle General Hospital. I was appointed to the position 2 weeks ago, but I've been working at this hospital for 3 years, most recently as chief resident. That night when you picked me up, I had just finished my last shift as a resident. I was transitioning to my new role, but I wanted to cover one final shift to help a colleague. Marcus felt his mouth fall open. Director of Operations. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but it sounded important. Very important. I've been thinking about that night every day since Emma was born, Rebecca continued. About how you treated me with dignity and kindness when I was at my most vulnerable. About how you didn't see a potential networking opportunity or someone who might be useful to you later. You just saw a human being who needed help. She shifted Emma to her other arm and looked Marcus directly in the eye. I want to offer you a job. Marcus blinked, certain he had misheard. I'm sorry, what? A job, Rebecca repeated. We're expanding our patient transport services, and we need someone to head up a new program that provides transportation for patients who are being discharged but don't have reliable ways to get home safely. It would involve driving, but also coordinating with social workers, insurance companies, and community organizations. The starting salary is $68,000 a year, plus full health benefits for your entire family. Marcus felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. $68,000 was more money than he had ever imagined making. It was nearly double what he and Carmen brought home combined. I don't understand, he said slowly. I don't have any experience in healthcare or administration. I'm just a driver. You're not just a driver, Rebecca said firmly. You're someone who understands what it means to care for people during their most vulnerable moments. You're someone who sees the human being behind the medical condition. That night, you didn't just transport me from point A to point B. You made me feel safe and supported when I was terrified. That's exactly the kind of person we need for this program. Marcus was speechless. He thought about all the nights he had driven through the city, picking up strangers and listening to fragments of their stories. He thought about the elderly man who had cried in his back seat after visiting his wife in hospice care. He thought about the young mother who had counted out exact change from a sandwich bag to pay for a ride to her son's parent-teacher conference. He thought about all the people who had trusted him with their vulnerabilities, their fears, their small moments of need. I don't know what to say, Marcus finally managed. Say you'll think about it, Rebecca said. I know it's a big decision. Take some time to discuss it with your wife. The position wouldn't start until after the first of the year, so you'd have time to finish up your current commitments and prepare for the transition. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. My direct number is on there. Call me when you've decided, or if you have any questions. As Rebecca loaded Emma's carrier into the back seat of his car for the ride to her destination, Marcus felt like he was living in someone else's life. This morning, he had been a struggling rideshare driver worried about making rent. Now he was holding a business card that might represent a completely different future for his family. The ride to Rebecca's downtown apartment was quiet except for Emma's occasional soft sounds from the back seat. When they arrived, Rebecca handed Marcus the fare plus a generous tip, but he shook his head. I can't take your money, he said. Not after what you just offered me. Rebecca smiled. Marcus, whether or not you take the job, you've already given me something invaluable. You gave me kindness when I needed it most. Let me give you something in return. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Carmen, Emma's soft cries from the baby monitor in the background as Miguel colored. Quietly nearby, he told Carmen about the job offer, watching her expression change from disbelief to excitement to cautious hope. 68,000? She repeated, as if saying the number aloud would make it more real. Plus health insurance, Marcus added. Full coverage for all of us. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. What's the catch? She finally asked. Nothing like this just happens to people like us. Marcus understood her skepticism. They had been struggling for so long that good fortune felt suspicious, like something that happened to other people, but never to them. I don't think there is a catch, he said slowly. I think it's exactly what she said it is. A job offer from someone who remembered a kindness. They talked late into the night, weighing the risks and possibilities. Carmen worried about Marcus leaving the flexibility of driving for the unknown territory of a hospital job. Marcus worried about whether he was qualified for such a position, whether he would be able to live up to Rebecca's faith in him. But underneath their concerns was a growing sense of hope that felt almost dangerous to entertain. Hope for a future where they wouldn't have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. Hope for insurance that would cover Carmen's delivery without putting them into debt. Hope for time together as a family that wasn't overshadowed by financial stress. 2 days later, Marcus called the number on Rebecca's business card. "I'd like to accept your offer," he said when she answered. "I'm so glad," Rebecca replied, and he could hear the genuine warmth in her voice. "I think you're going to do amazing things with this program." As they discussed start dates and logistics, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him, not just for the job, but for the reminder that small acts of kindness could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine. He had helped a stranger on a rainy night, and she had remembered. She had seen something in him that he hadn't even seen in himself. The next few months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Marcus continued driving part-time while preparing for his new role, reading everything he could find about healthcare administration and patient advocacy. Carmen's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and for the first time in years, they were able to focus on the joy of expecting a child rather than the financial stress it would bring. Their son Daniel was born on a clear January morning, healthy and beautiful, in the same hospital where Marcus had first met Rebecca. The delivery was covered completely by their new insurance, and Marcus was able to take 2 weeks of paid paternity leave to be home with Carmen and both boys. On Marcus's first day of work at Seattle General, Rebecca gave him a tour of the hospital, introducing him to the staff he would be working with and showing him the office that would be his. It was small but had a window that looked out over the city, and on the desk was a framed photo of the hospital's mission statement, which spoke about treating every patient with dignity, compassion, and respect. "I thought you might like that," Rebecca said, noting his attention to the frame. "It reminds me of how you treated me that night, before you knew who I was or what I could offer you in return." Marcus's new role exceeded every expectation he had dared to hold. The patient transport program he developed became a model for other hospitals in the region, providing safe, reliable transportation for patients who might otherwise struggle to get to follow-up appointments or return home after treatment. He worked with social workers to identify patients who needed additional support, coordinated with community organizations to provide services beyond transportation, and personally drove some of the most vulnerable patients himself. Within his first year, Marcus had expanded the program to include partnerships with local rideshare companies, training drivers to work specifically with medical patients and providing them with additional compensation for the specialized service. He thought often of his own nights driving strangers through the city, and he made sure that the drivers in his program understood that they were doing more than just providing transportation. They were offering human connection to people during some of their most difficult moments. Rebecca and Marcus became close colleagues and friends, bonding over their shared commitment to patient care and their understanding of what it meant to be vulnerable and in need of help. Emma grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved visiting Uncle Marcus at the hospital, and Rebecca often joked that Emma's first word after Mama and Dada had been Marcus. 2 years after that rainy night when their lives first intersected, Marcus was promoted to Director of Community Outreach, overseeing not just the patient transport program, but also the hospital's partnerships with local schools, social service organizations, and community health initiatives. Carmen had returned to teaching and was pursuing a master's degree in educational administration, supported by the tuition reimbursement benefits from Marcus's job. On the anniversary of the night they had first met, Rebecca and Marcus met for coffee in the hospital cafeteria, a tradition they had established the year before. Emma, now walking and chattering constantly, played with toys at their feet while they talked about the growth of the programs Marcus had developed and the impact they were having on the community. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Rebecca asked, watching Emma stack blocks with intense concentration. "How do you mean?" Marcus replied. "If you had declined that ride request that night, if you had gone home to Carmen instead of picking up one more passenger, If you had just dropped me off at the entrance instead of staying to make sure I was okay. Marcus considered this. I think about it sometimes, he said, but I don't think I would have made different choices. That's just who I am, I guess. Who Carmen and I both are. We believe in showing up for people. Rebecca smiled. That's exactly why I knew you were the right person for this job. Not because of your experience or your credentials, but because of your character. As they talked, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The financial struggles that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like a distant memory, but he hadn't forgotten the stress and uncertainty of those times. If anything, his own experiences had made him better at his job, more empathetic to the patients and families he served. The patient transport program had grown to serve over 1,000 patients per month, and the data showed significant improvements in follow-up appointment attendance and medication compliance among participants. But beyond the statistics, Marcus knew the real impact was in the individual stories. The elderly man who had been able to continue his cancer treatments because he had reliable transportation. The new mother who had never missed a pediatric appointment because someone understood that she didn't own a car. The teenager with diabetes who had learned to manage his condition because he could get to his endocrinologist regularly. Every day, Marcus encountered people who reminded him of himself on that rainy night 2 years ago. People who were doing their best with limited resources, who were trying to take care of themselves and their families despite significant obstacles. His job allowed him to be for them what Rebecca had been for him, someone who saw their potential and gave them an opportunity to succeed. As the afternoon wound down and Rebecca prepared to take him home, she handed Marcus an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it and see." Inside was a letter from the hospital's board of directors, officially notifying Marcus that he had been selected to receive the annual Excellence in Community Service Award, along with a check for $10,000 and an additional week of paid vacation. Marcus looked up at Rebecca in shock. "Did you nominate me for this?" "I didn't have to," she said with a grin. 3 different department heads submitted nominations independently. "You've made quite an impression around here, Marcus Rodriguez." That evening, Marcus drove home through the same streets where he had once spent 14-hour shifts picking up strangers and worrying about bills. But now, instead of anxiety, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. He thought about all the patients he had helped over the past 2 years, all the drivers he had trained and mentored, all the families who had been able to focus on healing instead of logistics because of the programs he had built. When he arrived home, Carmen and the boys were in the backyard, Miguel pushing Daniel on a small swing, while Carmen tended to the vegetable garden they had planted that spring. The house they lived in now was larger, in a better neighborhood, with a yard where the boys could play safely. But more than the material improvements, Marcus felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. As he joined his family in the yard, lifting Daniel from the swing and listening to Miguel's excited chatter about his day at school, Marcus thought about the woman who had changed his life by simply remembering his kindness. Rebecca had given him more than a job. She had given him proof that compassion was never wasted, that treating people with dignity and respect created ripples of positive change that extended far beyond what anyone could predict. That night, after the boys were asleep and Carmen was grading papers at the kitchen table, Marcus sat on their front porch and called his mother. He told her about the award, about the recognition of his work, about how proud he was of what he had built. But mostly, he told her about the lesson he had learned on a rainy night in Seattle, that the most important thing you can do for another person is to see them, truly see them, in their moment of need and choose to help without expecting anything. In return, your father would be so proud, his mother said, her voice thick with emotion. He always said that the measure of a man isn't what he achieves for himself, but what he does for others. After they hung up, Marcus remained on the porch for a while, listening to the sounds of his neighborhood settling into evening quiet. Somewhere in the city, rideshare drivers were navigating the streets, picking up strangers and listening to fragments of their stories. Somewhere, people were facing moments of crisis and vulnerability, hoping for someone to show them kindness. Marcus smiled, thinking about the ripples of compassion that were spreading outward from his program, from every driver who had been trained to see passengers as human beings rather than just fares, from every patient who had been treated with dignity during their most difficult moments. Rebecca had remembered his kindness and transformed his life. Now he was in a position to create those same opportunities for others, to be the person who remembered and acted on that memory. The next morning brought a new day of work, new patients to serve, new drivers to train, new ways to expand the reach of compassion in his community. Marcus drove to the hospital with a sense of anticipation and purpose, grateful for the reminder that in a world that often felt disconnected and impersonal, individual acts of kindness still had the power to change everything. As he pulled into the parking garage at Seattle General, Marcus caught sight of Rebecca walking toward the main entrance, coffee in one hand, Emma's hand in the other. She waved when she saw him, and he waved back, both of them sharing a moment of acknowledgement for the journey that had brought them from a desperate ride on a rainy night to this place of partnership and friendship. Marcus locked his car and walked toward the hospital entrance, ready to begin another day of work that felt less like a job and more like a calling. Behind him, the city was waking up, full of people who would face their own moments of need, their own opportunities to show kindness or receive it. And in the offices and corridors of Seattle General Hospital, the programs that had grown from one man's simple act of compassion continued to spread hope and healing throughout the community. Proof that sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with the most ordinary moments of human decency. The story of Marcus Rodriguez and Rebecca Chun had become more than just a personal transformation. It had become a testament to the power of seeing people for who they are in their most vulnerable moments, and choosing to help not because of what they might be able to do for you in return, but simply because it's the right thing to do. In a world that often felt divided and disconnected, their story offered hope that individual acts of kindness could still create waves of positive change that extended far beyond what anyone could imagine. And somewhere in Seattle, on any given night, drivers trained by Marcus were picking up passengers who needed more than just transportation. They were offering human connection, dignity, and care to people facing their own dark moments. Because Marcus had learned, on a rainy night 2 years ago, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up for another human being and refuse to leave them alone in their time of need. The ripples continued to spread, touching lives in ways both large and small, creating a network of compassion that grew stronger with each act of kindness, each moment of recognition, each decision to see the humanity in every person encountered along the way. This was the true legacy of that rainy night in Seattle. Not just the transformation of two lives, but the creation of a model for how people could care for each other, one ride, one moment, one act of grace at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.